Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology Podcast, featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle Podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
Hello.
I was wondering if there anything that you saw from the Q&A notes from last night, or would you like me to read off some things?
There was some discussion of AI, and I have seen AI reports, and I have to say I'm not terribly impressed yet. Quite often, the user has pointed the software at specific frequencies as though those frequencies are set up by God somehow, and everybody's custom. So if you're looking for gamma at one frequency and it's at another and you're not looking there, you're going to miss it. And I've seen people with standardized band definitions miss, what's really going on. And it's going to take a long time before it's ready for even curated use that's not done at an expert level with more expertise than the AI in order to manage it. And that's the trick. You can't be lazy and depend on it because it's going to hallucinate. And it's just a matter of time. And you've got to be there to catch it.
What percentage compared to Jay Gunkelman you think we're at? 20%?
Well, don't use me as any kind of a metric of anything.
You are the metric.
I'm just plain off.
You're the gold standard.
I'm a curve wrecker. So.
Oh, I love that.
Hey, they hated me in school.
Well, it's not ready for prime time. I'm just kind of curious if you could throw a number, like if it's 2 out of 10 ready, 1 out of 10, or 0 out of 10,
In the right hands, it can be used for specific purposes. As an example, Lisa Tatrin's work on Parkinsonism. But if you're pointing a software package that's learned something about Parkinsonism at something other than Parkinsonism, you're going to get odd answers. Mark Newer many years ago congratulated Bob Thatcher on contributing to the science of traumatic brain injury with his knowledge of quantitative MRI, quantitative EEG correlation, white matter, gray matter differentiation. And at the same time, he suggested that the discriminant, which is traumatic brain injury versus normal, wasn't a diagnostic metric because it hadn't been tested against false positive as false negative, and we actually did some of that testing. Curtly Thornton, who's passed not all that long ago, did it first, and his numbers were so far off that I wanted to replicate it, and I replicated Curtly Thornton's work. So. We found a 50% false positive when it's used as a screener, which is not how it's supposed to be used. You have to have a specific question. My client had a traumatic head injury. Does he have a brain injury? And he was normal versus. So, you can't really test that. It's not. When was the question? Is it normal versus head trauma? I mean, is this depression versus head trauma? Is this something other than normal versus head trauma? And it also, as a standard declared by the manufacturer of the metric, you have to declare that the EEG is normal. Okay, who's qualified to declare that?
Whatever normal is.
Yeah, well, it's a normal EEG, medically normal EEG. If you're not qualified to call it a medically normal EEG, what are you doing running the metric? But we found a 50% false positive, and he found a 30% false negative. Thatcher called it at a 20% false negative, which means 1 person out of 5 that had a head injury would be told they didn't. It had a brain injury, traumatic brain injury, and they had one and they've been told that they didn't. So, but he claimed a 0% false negative or false positive, and if you've seen row curves, it's a graph with a right angle, and there's a curve that fits within it, and the distance from the edge to the curve is the false positive and false negative rate. And I have yet ever to see real data go all the way up and hit the axis and go all the way across at 100%. When you claim 100%, you better have some damn good data, and I've yet to see anybody replicate that kind of data. So
use silly analogies sometimes because everybody gets them, and some are more brilliant than others. And I apologize, my analogy that came to me this morning isn't necessarily a good one, but I think it'll get the idea across, which is, you're not feeling well because you've got a broken leg. You can do all kinds of analysis to confirm how the leg is broken, what the type of fracture is, et cetera, but you can't say the leg was broken with a sledgehammer versus the leg was broken with a car accident, et cetera. So I think that's where we go after our symptoms, and then of course the contributing underlying phenotypes, et cetera. So I'm 100% with Jay on this. Well, when are we not 100% with Jay? Let's get rid of no, but all of these claims just drive me crazy, and and especially when we get a lot of people have had head injury under circumstances that are they're angry, they've been hurt, sometimes it's been perpetrated upon them, and trying to determine whether for a car accident or assault or slip and fall, sometimes there are lawyers and courts involved, and our assessment saying this was a head injury due to et cetera. We have to be really careful if we're helping or really not helping, both in false positive, giving a lawyer ammunition that they shouldn't have, and exactly conversely when you have a very serious head injury and our nice little assessment says there wasn't one. So be really cautious about how our tools are used outside of our clinics. Right, there's another one there.
Yeah. And then ICA and PICA use came up, Jay. What is ICA and PICA? Is it ICA and PICA?
In fact, ICA is independent component analysis, and usually principal component analysis, PCA, is compared to it. PCA is, first of all, these are blind source separation techniques, and historically they did things like factor analysis, and people that do stats understand factor analysis. You're looking for the factors that make up the data set. And principal component analysis is appropriate for Gaussian or normal distributions. And although people will argue whether the EEG is normally distributed or not, I mean, when you have to do a log correction of it, it's not really normally distributed. But nevertheless, ICA is appropriate for non-Gaussian distributions, and nobody's going to argue that artifact is Gaussian in its distribution. So I see as a perfect way to take out artifacts. Now, it's better at some kinds of artifacts than others. EMG, especially if you've got a funky amplifier that doesn't differentiate high frequencies very well, and if you filter everything from 30 and below, you don't really differentiate muscle from beta. So ICA has got to be fed good data in order for it to do a good job. But it does a nice job taking out eye blinks and pulse artifacts, slow content. Some kinds, if you've got a kind of a bouncy baseline on one EEG electrode, it can take that out as well. The thing is, if you see one electrode kind of with a baseline wander, if you look at it carefully, there's actually EEG riding on top of that baseline wander. And if the EEG is similar to the content surrounding it, it's not unique to that electrode, the component that's taking out stuff unique to the electrode is going to take out the baseline wander, not the stuff that's common to the surround. So you can actually cleanly take out all sorts of kinds of artifact. Now, there's still some pieces you have to cut out. And if there's a gross discontinuity, you should cut that out before you do the ICA. Discontinuity is something that's just plain old not EEG. The amp stopped and restarted, and the amp warm up big bouncy waves. Cut that out. You're going to eat up half your components trying to figure out what the source of that is. And so you need to do ICA properly, but when done properly, it's really a great technique. Now, there are those that are not able to do it with their software, and they're adamantly against the use of it, but that's a commercial bias, not science. And try to find a quantitative EEG publication nowadays that doesnn't use ICA. Or some other form of source analysis and de-artifacting. There are other forms of it than just ICA. There's fast ICA, which is fast but not terribly accurate. It finds one component at a time and takes it out. There's Infomax, which looks for the components and then tries to maximally separate them. And that's a much better job than fast ICA. But it takes time. It's an iterative process. It finds components and then tries to separate them for maximal independence between, thus Infomax is the name of it, maximal independence of the components. And then there's advanced mixture, AMICA. And there's a few different ICA techniques that are combined in AMICA. It's much more computationally intensive, and usually people that use it have a extraordinarily good computer or take a great deal of time. The South Korean database and everything is managed on a cloud supercomputer, so it's very fast, even though it's using AMICA. So ICA isn't ICA, but as a general class, as a technique, it's a relatively newer technique. In 2001, Yuri and I lectured together in Portugal. And partway through the lecture, he was talking about eye movement and de-artifacting. And in a break, I asked him, "Are you using ICA to take out eye movement?" And, I thought of it as like a claw hammer. You could pull artifact out with it, And he said, "Oh, we tried PCA and it just doesn't work." They gave up on component extraction of eye movement, and they were doing like everybody else had. They see the big eye blinks, they cut them out. They see the big lateral eye movement, they cut them out. But you can't cut out saccadic eye movements. They're small, ongoing, about every 80 milliseconds. They're faster than alpha. Some people's alpha. Anyway, he said no, he hadn't, and I handed him a paper from Schwartz Computational Neuroscience by Scott McCaig, and on Infomax, and a spatially constrained independent component analysis. And 2 weeks later, after the meeting in Portugal, which was really a great time, I got home. I got in the mail. I got a disc with Yuri's WinEEG software on it with ICA working. So not only did he find it to be useful for taking out artifacts, but he's a real neuroscientist. I'm a tech, and he saw the value of the components that were left. If you take out the artifact and you do a component analysis of the EEG, you see meaningful pieces of the EEG and meaningful pieces of the event-related potential. He received the Russian, used to be the USSR Prize for Science, kind of like the Nobel Prize is for the West. This is their science prize. He received the Russian Prize for Science for using ICA to decompose the EEG and ERP into meaningful components. We've been very good friends ever since. So, it's a valuable technique. It saves the ability to do the EEG in many cases. I have a client that specializes in autism. That the bread and butter that's coming through their door is autistic kids. Now, it's really difficult to get a recording with a young autistic kid with a spandex cap on their head and whatnot. They send caps home to get them accustomed to pulling caps on and whatnot. But the first one is usually only eyes open, and it's full of artifact. Eye blinks, movement, muscle. If you didn't have ICA, you wouldn't be able to see the underlying value in the EEG at all. You'd go, oh, you have to re-record it. Yeah, like that's going to happen. Somebody refers you to the EEG and you say, oh, it's not good enough. Well, they just spent 3 hours getting the cap on and it gelled and the mother was holding it. I'm sorry, you got to do that again? They'll give up on EEG at that point. And we've been able to deliver valuable information. Oh, that's not all movement. There's actually an epileptiform discharge. About 60% of the autism population have unexpected epileptiform discharges. If you can't do the EEG at all because of the eye blinks and muscle and you throw away the EEG, you threw out the baby of the data with the bathwater of the artifact. And you can't do that in clinical work. I mean, if it's research, you say, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't quite good enough to make it into the database. The quality of the data wasn't perfect or adequate. But in clinical work, you got to have an answer. You can't, knuckle under and say, I'm sorry, this isn't really good work. That you've got to be able to do your job and analyze what they send. And if you can't, it's either purely bad, and there are those, they're rare, but there's some that just can't be cleaned. But
I just say that's the absolute reality of clinical work and clinical practice. I mean, it's almost like you don't know what to do when you don't have dirty data to a certain extent. I mean, I mean, that might be a clinical issue on its own. The person, there's always, and I think, apart from really, really developing your talent and artifacting skills, but learning to see through it and learning to see through it on the fly quickly. And I, to a certain extent, especially with children, a lot of these things actually become a valid variable. With autism, with ADHD, not with development. I'm not talking about natural wiggly pigglies. But you have to integrate it, but you have to really know what you're integrating and know what you're looking at. It's a simple.
In the sham control studies that have been done where they allowed their EMG and eye movements to be in the data set so that they could not identify whether they were a yoked control or where they were in the active group, the treatment group, they fed back eye movement, and the frontal eye fields regulate eye movement, and they fed back EMG, so they had to learn how to relax, and they had to learn how to control their eyes. And at the end of the treatment, there wasn't an easy differentiation between the control and the treatment group. However, at 6-month and 1-year follow-up, the treatment group differentiated because you learn to control eye movement and muscle, but not brain. And long term, the behavioral stuff washed out, and the treatment group ended up showing the positive treatment effect, which actually consolidates more after you're done.
Yeah, you brought up squirming kids, and Dr. Marie, you can weigh in on this because there was the question last night. How do you deal with squirming kids and getting a good EEG, signal and training? What do you do?
We don't do what we used to do.
NyQuil?
No.
Remember, we use needle electrodes, and you're not going to get 21 needles in a kid's head with them awake. So we had a standing order, chlorohydrate, and then later on they switched to Demerol, Phenergan, Thorazine, but you would knock the kid out.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the show and want to help us keep it going, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support helps improve the content and brings on great guests and grow the show. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/NeuroNoodle. But hey, if supporting financially isn't in the cards right now, no worries. You can still help us out for free by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. It really makes a difference and helps more people find the show. If we've earned it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode.
You give them a syrupy deal, they liked it actually, and one little nip on that, and about 20 minutes later you see them just nodding off. And about that time you're measuring for where you're going to place the electrodes, and you can stick the electrodes on. But it's an unconscious, sedated, unconscious kid. How good is that? Well, how useful is that data? How useful is that data?
I do things slightly differully.
Yeah. Well, we evolved. We don't use tube amps anymore. We don't use needle electrodes to speak of anymore. And we don't sedate the kids unconscious to find out what their brain is doing. We want them eyes open and eyes closed, sometimes on a task, just to see what engagement's like an event-related potential is a perfect task, but some people just do mental math or reading or something to put the brain on a task. But watching a working brain is better than watching a sedated brain. You get all sorts of barbiturate spindles.
This is where I like to say the art comes into the science. Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, there are people who can work with kids and there are people who can't work with kids. I'm sorry, you have to get down to the kids level. So you're doc on the one side and you're a 6 or an 8-year-old with the child. And I find you kind of go back with that. The other, as we were talking about, is your artifact becomes one of your variables. I mean, there were older equipment. Oh, I miss it so much where, a good old CAP scan. What happened to CAP scan? I love CAP scan. Where you had your EMG, right on in there and you could literally train with it. The other is, I have them, I'm facing the other direction, but I have all kinds of little tiny toys. I think I have, my collection of little rats up here, and you want something that the child can play with. So instead of the wire, you have a cute little rat tail, okay? And I tend to give them a little softer, it's not quite a fidget, but instruct them to hold it lower on their lap. And you don't get as much movement because they're, something like that versus that or all the movement. So this is, anybody who works with kids finds a subtle way to get in. The other is a lot of the kids that you're working with, sure, they're the behavioral issues, but a lot of them are scholastic. So we almost exclusively here do brain driving with children. Okay. You want to see artifact. Okay. So we have the glasses on, we have the lights on, we have the recording, we have the feedback loop as we're teaching the child how to read. Okay. As we're teaching a child how to write, as we're doing mathematical skills, it's just loaded with artifact. So that's where your baseline from week to week is your measure. And most folks, when you get to know a child, you can get, your 20 seconds, your 30 seconds, clear baseline, you count your child through. So you're measuring different forms of the data, but the in-session data, it's dirty data. It's just dirty data. But as I said, and no pardoning the repetition, as you see, you'll see the artifacts start to go down over time. And that's part of your measurement too. Yeah, but it's fabulous working with little kids.
Yeah. Do you do like tokens, like a treasure chest?
Yes.
Josh? Okay.
Yes, always. And we have a non-traditional, so we're not giving out little bubble gum and toys and things. We give out coins, stamps. A lot of the kids don't even know what stamps are anymore. We slip in a few little things. We actually had one kid, this is years ago,
It was a coin, and they went down to the coin dealer and they got $10 for it, right? So we sleep in tons and tons of rocks, and then we have our little a ledger, so they look up what the rocks are, etc. And this is when the brain is sharp. So you've just finished working with the child, they're curious, they're engaged. So yeah, I strongly recommend what we call the treasure chest. Yeah, again, do you want me to open my treasure chest? Yeah.
Well, how do you give out the rewards? Like, the buildup of credits, or each session you give them
After
something?
every single session, okay? And we very rarely say you're not getting a reward, okay? But no, after every single, we literally, here, I'll just slide on
Yeah,
over.
go right ahead.
We had a treasure chest as well, and if you know a normal sea chest sort of treasure chest, you lift the lid, and there's trays.
Yeah.
And there you go.
I think everybody's got that chest in neurofeedback.
And okay, so there we go. We have a pretty cool shark's tooth in there.
Oh.
We have a handmade bead from India. It's around Halloween. We're having fun. We have a surprise spider, but that isn't an actual gift.
Where's the $10 bill?
Not it varies. Yeah, a really interesting. The rocks, and the kids really get into it. We try and make it as varied as possible and rotate around. Yeah, nice little, turquoise bead.
The kids were always interested in going to get that. I didn't have as creative assortment. We went to toy stores and got the dirt cheap toys for the top tray, but there's a lower tray that had much better toys.
Dragon tier, that's not as fancy. But yeah, and also the one we have, here's another one. It's a little for the kids that are really, really very kinetic. This one, it has moving pieces, but that don't make noise. Okay, so we counsel, so the kids that come in and are very, very, I say kinetic, but the teachers complain about how they're hyperactive or fidgety. And there are certain kids where you ask them to sit still. They spend so much focus and energy trying to sit still, they cannot focus on the lesson. So you're actually creating a second problem. So that's where these things are great. And the child, whether it's a bracelet, they just rotate the beads. If it's a necklace, as long as it's not long enough to go into the mouth. So there are all kinds of ways that the kids can remain kinetic, and it actually helps them focus. And these are part of the treasure chest as well. So you kind of coach them what to take. So
no candy, no sugar.
We don't, what's the point of that? We want the child to engage in interesting things. And
if today you went to our offices, you'd find a big bowl of fresh fruit in the lobby.
Yeah.
That's exactly. It's a tradition in the Mideast, and Ali has maintained that, and it's a healthy one for kids that come in. Apples, oranges, tangerines, grapes, fruit.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. You got a squirmy 5-year-old. You're going to say you're going to give them an apple and they're going to stop squirming?
No, but you're going to have enough blood sugar in them so that you don't end up having false positives for odd things for hypoglycemic EEGs,
And also sometimes you're helping with parenting in terms of, the kids saying, I'm hungry, et cetera, et cetera. And they've a lot of, the high sugar snacks and things. Many good supermarkets, I don't know if they do it in the US, it's really sweet. They have a little bowl of fruit in the front so the kids aren't begging for the candy and the cereal.
Yeah.
It's just not just in clinics. It's a beautiful, wise thing to do when you have a lot of kids around.
Well, the other thing that's, what kind of feedback are you using? Because we were talking about the new core funky stuff and just a regular beat. Does a kid stay focused if you put the electronic game on versus the beep? And then we got into simple, just be simple.
Yeah. You're going to get on my soapbox over and over and over again, and this is an argument or debate I will have with my colleagues over and over and over again. If it's not boring, you're not influencing the brain. I say you're teaching the brain to sustain the mundane. No kid has any issue whatsoever focusing on a video game. No kid has any issue focusing on, algorithms that are put out, whether it's Snapchat or YouTube or, whatever. It changes so quickly. Okay. And if you're having that as the reward, you're getting false, I don't want to say false positives, but a false, positive reward. The data is looking great, but it does not translate into anything in real life. And arguably the kids either the families go away satisfied, and then nothing sticks, so they're out in the community saying it doesn't work, or they're back like a revolving door. So one of the things, and I have a few chuckles with parents because they want their kids to come. Says, oh, you're going to play a computer game with your head, et cetera, et cetera. That worked in 1997. Marketing. Okay, but now, no. So please don't tell your kids how much fun this is going to be, et cetera. I kind of go in and I'm like, okay, you're ready to be bored? Okay, and you can see I'm obviously talking at that point with a 7-year-old boy. Right? Like, come on. And this is what I'm saying. You have to be a doctor and a kid at the same time. And I know it's boring. Geez, okay, well, you only got 2 more. Like you play with them, you work with them, you align with them. Yeah.
Can't you hook up Nucor to like a claw machine? I think that would really get kids.
John LeMay has the ability to fly a blimp.
Yeah. Cool.
And up, down, forward. I mean, it's all under brain control.
Yeah.
So. And the other thing is when you're doing the training, maybe not so much for kids, but when you have like OCD people, they want to know what the score was at the end of training. Do you give them the quote unquote score, or you tell the tech to keep their mouth shut?
Keep your mouth shut. No, I mean,
our scores are usually pretty obvious right on screen, so they may obsessively keep track of them. But if you change the anterior cingulate, you're not going to find the problem with the OCD by the time you're done. So.
Yeah. Well, I find also, the issue with wanting to know session to session to session to session, you get obsessed with it and you can't see the pattern. So very, very typically, I mean, depending on, which measure, you're going to see it go up, 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 but it is going in the correct trajectory. So you have to kind of scope out on it. The other is, depending on the knowledge. So if they're asking the neurotech, poor neurotech, sometimes they don't see the bigger picture. I talk about the individual data points and what I also refer to as the constellation. Sometimes other things are going on and it's not exactly what's featured on the screen. So this is where we repeat our reassessment every 6 sessions or so. So we get the big picture, seeing what areas have been recruited, and we can really, ensure that we're not just reporting on the dip. You don't want to demotivate people. Okay. I don't think there's no deceit in this whatsoever. You just don't want to demotivate. If somebody has had really good sessions and then the one when they ask, it's gone down, we know the next one is probably going to go up.
So imagine Pete as a little kid, little Pete, little tiny Pete, and
what? He'd never be tiny.
And the family sees he's growing like weeds here, But if every day they made a mark on the door, like people tend to do, a little mark on, and the date, they'd have a smear. They wouldn't. You have to take a little bit of time and allow for some change, and then you actually see incremental growth. If you measure too often, you're just getting a smear of data, and too much data is obfuscation. It's not clarification. So take your time in between assessments. Give change time to change.
Mm-hmm.
And everything has its own inherent learning curve, and for different treatments, it's different amounts of time that you may have to take, and for different groups of patients as well. In working with epilepsy, you can't kind of focus on how many epileptiform bursts happen. 10 sessions in, it might not look any different at all. But 100 sessions in, you're going to see some major change.
Yeah, you always have to consider who the data is for, and when I can be, not, I wouldn't say standoffish, but I can say, yeah, I mean, I can spend 2 hours with you explaining everything, or you can have a treatment, right? In terms of the the cost of time, and some of what we see is just for the clinician. Right, where we can kind of see through the blur, and just as what Jay said, some conditions and some reasons why people come in. Yeah, I mean, there's no point whatsoever in doing these constant reassessments, and there the subjective data tends to be more important. How many seizures have you had this week or this day? What's the texture to them? Are they as deep? Are they as long? Or is they, we're using terms that the clients can really measure, right? So frequency, depth, and strength of the seizures, right? And sometimes the subjective moves before the objective, and vice versa. And again, if you have the subjective moving first, I'm not going to sit there and go, oh, that's a placebo, right? Because it 50, I'm just going to throw numbers out, 50% it could be the placebo, and then the brain follows and catches on, or it could be something is happening and we don't have it in our data yet. So it's really, really important. But I also say I'm very, very transparent with the clients and saying that, you're being that close to the data doesn't help. And there are a few clients who absolutely insist. Okay. And it's trying for the client, and it's trying for the clinician. Right. But,
Speaking of epilepsy and recovery from epilepsy, Isabella Harvison presented at the Suisun Summit. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. And I got a wet eye patch myself on that one. But we have set up a grant award in her name for people that have overcome and are and have achieved their performance. So she overcame her epilepsy, and she's a professional tennis player in Europe at this point. And so we're looking for the ability to provide grant assistance for somebody who's overcome and is working in the area of performance.
Here's one that I've never heard of before, which doesn't mean anything, but peptides and EEG came up, and I was just like, I have no idea. I've never heard that before. Why should I have heard that before, Jay, Dr. Marie?
Like any substance you can end up taking that influences the EEG. Peptides are a class of and they have effects, but you have to remember, if you're giving something to the body to influence the brain, the body and brain are neuroplastic, and they're going to adapt. So you have to be careful what you're doing and what the long-term consequences are.
What is a peptide? Like, what is it, in a candy bar or something? I shouldn't have it before a session. Like, what is
it? What we should do is get Michael Pierce to come on and talk about nutritional and nutraceutical influences on the body and the brain, because it's his area of expertise. Yeah. Give me a wiggly line any day, but
yeah. It's funny. It's the market is flooded, and
I don't argue with a client who says they're feeling better, okay? But I have done intakes, where somebody comes in and it's literally a garbage bag, and they just plop all this stuff out um, on the table. And I have to answer, I don't know, and a lot of the literature is not true literature. It's hype or very, very bad, research. But if it's working for you, okay. But I also think the cleaner the brain, the better. And just because a lot of these things, we're very cautious about pharmaceuticals, but a lot of the things you get through other sources, they still can be dangerous. They can be helpful and they can be dangerous. But same as Jay, I do not claim to be an expert, but confounding variables, here we go again. Are the people using all these things coming to you because they're using too many things and they're the cause? Or are the people so desperate? I'm playing around a little bit here. But
if they have too big a bag, check the anterior cingulate to see how obsessed they are.
Yeah. An egg there, right? When people are really desperate, they'll do anything. And the money, my God, the money that is spent.
Yeah, water-soluble vitamins are one thing, oil-soluble is another. You can actually end up on occasion seeing people that are taking so much vitamin A from various sources, a multivitamin, a couple of other things, and end up with a toxic level. So it's good to have a consultant that knows what they're doing. And as I say, Michael Pierce would be a great guest to bring on to discuss just this as a focused topic.
Okay. And I'll go on listen only.
Well, we did have Mike on last week, or the show that's going to come out today. Where Jay and I were on the porch having a little chat, and then he just walked by, hopped over the fence, and gave us a couple minutes. So we got to get him back.
Yeah,
Jay, how
absolutely.
How do people get a copy of that video? SuisunSummit.com and
Suisun Summit 2025 has the registration page, and there's a sales page for recordings. If you, let's say you wanted to get the entire set of recordings for the 3 days, that's the same price as somebody that paid for a live stream. We're not giving it to you for less than somebody who actually paid for it live gets it for. But you can also buy a single day for $150. Or you can buy an individual talk for $50. But whatever you're buying of recordings are basically funding student grants. This isn't a funding of somebody's pockets or something like that. It's all charitable. There's nobody drawing salaries or overhead or anything like that.
It's an investment. You're not buying.
In fact, institutions want to take 15%. If we donate to a school, they want to take 15% administrative overhead.
Oh, wow.
And I say, F that.
What are they?
I want to fund the student, not the institution necessarily. So we do stuff through professors that hand it all to the student, or we do direct to student. But I understand the institution has to exist as well, but not based on small student grants like this. If they get a big $1 million grant, they're going to have overhead. But this is not that.
Well, if you weren't able to make it, you can catch the videos here. We'll put it right here. And if you're stressing because you couldn't see the videos, how do you unstress, Dr. Marie?
Well, you can go to swinglesonic.com and get our Brain Calm app. And if you're not sleeping well, you can get the sleep app. And For the little kids and the big kids, anybody who's having trouble with focus and memory, we have the focus as well. And all rigorously tested under clinical conditions.
Duly noted. Jay Gunkelman, Dr. Marie Swingle, another great episode of NeuroNoodle Neurofeedback Podcast. See you next week.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks, Pete.
All
It was
right,
good
Jay,
it was good to see you in 3D, by the way.
in person, yeah. I'm much smaller in person.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the show and want to help us keep it going, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support helps improve the content and brings on great guests and grow the show. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/NeuroNoodle. But hey, if supporting financially isn't in the cards right now, no worries. You can still help us out for free by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. It really makes a difference and helps more people find the show. If we've earned it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. The NeuroNoodle Podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Hey everyone, here's a quick message from our good old buddy Joshua Moore at Alternative Behavioral Therapy.
I'm preparing to do an introduction to QEEG phenotypes. This is my first workshop on the topic, and this is just the introductory overview of the project. This is going to be very, very basic. So let's review each phenotype. We're just going to go through them one by one. If you look at the DSM-1, 2, or 3, and you look at the first chapter, it actually acknowledges that the DSM in mental health is just, quote, a descriptive adaptation, unquote. We're going to customize the interventions and tailor them to the individual's brain activity, not just applying the treatments or trainings to the individual's phenotype and maybe even their variants, but also customizing the protocols themselves to fit that person's individual unique frequency patterns. Maybe a dozen ways to have excessive energy in your nervous system, and then there's an infinite amount of ways to relate poorly to that excessive energy, which means that there is a lot of variations in what someone might call anxiety. And that doesn't mean that we're talking about the same thing when we're talking about anxiety. So complicated stuff. But when we look at a brain map, we get some basis in which we can start talking about what is this energy. Then we have to go to the client. We have to start talking to the client about what is your association to this specific kind of energy that I can see now. Then we get to care about things that insurance doesn't restrict us on. We get to care about like the person in a broader way. 85% improvement in mental health report following pairing a medication with a specific phenotype. Geez. Okay, have you seen 85% in any mental health studies for any medication? I'm going to be going over a whole bunch of different types of tests, assessments, and things that can be used that have things called neurocorrelates, which you saw some of those already. Better success outcomes. That's what we really want. We need better predictive power. We need better individualization. That's what we want.